because the United Nations serves as the home of all governments and all nations throughout the world. This is the house of peace and the house of communications with one another. And America must not take advantage of its position as a host and only grant visas to whomever America likes. Yes, if someone wishes to travel to America, that's their prerogative as a tourist or something else. That's their prerogative to grant visa or not. But to come to the United Nations, particularly Muslim countries, particularly third world countries, even neighboring countries such as Mexico, even they are facing problems as far as being able to enter the United States. And I think this path that America has chosen does not benefit anyone. But as far as the United Nations headquarters being moved to another place, that is an important decision. If we're ever asked, we will of course vote for it, for the United Nations headquarters to be transferred to a more secure and better country that does not have the narrow viewpoints that we have been witnessing.
The next question goes to Franco Ciardo, TRT.
سلام آقای دکتر.
Greetings, Mr. President. Thus far, for a few times, you have spoken of the conditions for talks with America, for America to do away with the sanctions, return to the JCPOA, and then start talks. As someone who has the years and years-long experience of such talks, how much do you see this as being feasible and realistic and possible? What we announce are our policies. Now, if we want to put percentages on the possibility of that occurring, at any time a country can feel that her previous policies were wrong and return to the correct path. So what we say is for America to take the preconditions off the table. The precondition of America is, if it wishes to talk to Iran, the condition is that the sanctions and a maximum pressure upon the Iranian people must be implemented and then enter into talks. We say this is the wrong precondition. This must be taken off the table. The sanctions must be dissolved. Cease this policy of maximum pressure and pursue a policy of dialogue and logic and reason, and to seek that which benefits the world and America. If we reach a time when these preconditions are taken off the table, of course, the possibility exists to talk with America.
Next question goes to Eddie Lederer, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. Frank Ciardo from TRT World. Thank you for having this press conference every year for us. We appreciate that. Question, do you still have any confidence in the existing members of the JCPOA to financially support the deal? What's left of it?
Following the unilateral exit of the United States of America from the JCPOA, the remaining parties, which are the 4+1, held meetings at different levels and promised us that they would be able to make up for the exit of the United States from the deal and for the JCPOA to continue. We were not happy to see the JCPOA damaged and wanted to do everything we could within our power for the JCPOA to remain steadfast. So we listened to them, to their plans and proposals. The Europeans set forth many plans. Initially, they told us we will go through central banks in order to conduct transactions and business with you. After a few months, they said, we have run into problems with our central banks, so we will go through another financial system. a special purpose vehicle, or SPV, if you will. So through that SPV, we will conduct financial affairs with you. After a few months, they came back and said this system has run into challenges as well. And now we'll go through another system named Instex. Thus far, this last one, even in practice, has not been able to stand on its feet. So, unfortunately, when it comes to actions, Europe has demonstrated its inability or lack of willingness. Or perhaps it wishes to not pay anything for the agreement that it is a part of, because maybe it emanates from a mentality that says, I wish to stay in this multilateral agreement, but I wish to put all of the costs and the burdens on the shoulder of Iran. So we kept trying. We are still talking to them. Our distinguished foreign minister, during the last few days that has been in New York City, has had meetings with the 4+1 representatives, and perhaps other talks will continue. But thus far, unfortunately, they have not succeeded. About 4 months ago, we announced to them that if you are not able to adhere to your commitments, we will also gradually decrease our commitments. In 2 steps, in 2 phases, we decreased our commitments, and during the 3rd step, which was announced and began, we hope that before we reach the end of the 60-day period that we have given, we can reach an agreement. But if they can adhere to their commitments, if they cannot adhere to their commitments, of course we will take further steps.
Associated Press. Next question, Mr. Mohsen Tayerzadeh, IRNA.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Edith Lederer of the Associated Press. We know that President Macron of France was trying to arrange a meeting between you and President Trump. Were there any contacts at all between your delegation and the American delegation? And there are some reports that President Trump may still want to meet you, not in New York necessarily, but somewhere else in the coming months. Is that a possibility even if sanctions aren't lifted?
Of course, the President of France has been seeking for months to find a solution for this problem. We were carrying forward 2 solutions, the European solution and the American solution. The European solution, in that framework, we reached certain agreements, and it was in the implementation stage when they said, well, in some form to implement and make actionable the European solution, we need the American approval. So this is their problem, that it has little or nothing to do with us. Of course, always Mr. Macron has been pursuing this line as well, that the better solution would be to resolve the problem between Iran and America. And we have said it, and I said it during this press conference as well, that America must do away and take off the table the preconditions. And if they do so, of course the ground would be laid for certain new conditions which can be considered. Of course, during the meetings that we've had in the past few days in New York City, we have talked about different positions, held different discussions. And I don't want to say that such plans will never be realized, but thus far during this visit, we have not reached a point of confirmation. And of course, there are other pathways above and beyond that of France, and those are being carried forward as well.
Here's not the next question.
In your opinion, if Mr. Trump is seeking a new agreement, why does he not do away with the sanctions and take them off the table so as to open a pathway for negotiations? And after returning to Iran, are you able to say that you did your utmost to do away with the sanctions? I believe that what America was seeking from day one of the sanctions and its exit from the JCPOA, it wanted, in a way, to tell the people of Iran that the Iranian establishment or the Iranian government administration is the responsible party due to which your affairs are not being moved forward efficiently. But the path chosen by Mr. Trump, the formula implemented by him, was not a path that would respond to those needs, because he didn't say that I am leaving. He couldn't say that I'm leaving because Iran has had problems implementing or living to her commitments. He just said from the very beginning, even slogans going back to the campaign season, he said he was against this agreement. But usually such slogans that are heard during an election campaign, once that campaign comes to an end, those slogans are dropped and reality sets in. But that continued, unfortunately, with Mr. Trump, and he chose a way of going about this that naturally it demonstrated that America is to be condemned for this policy, for the implementation of these policies, because they were forced to admit time and time again that Iran has been living up to her commitments according to IAEA reports. And he kept stating that I don't like this agreement. An agreement reached by a government has nothing to do with likes or dislikes, is not a food item on a menu that's subject to change on a daily basis. So an agreement, a multilateral agreement between many nations, between 7 governments, it is enshrined in the UN Security Council resolution. So the objective of the United States of America, that was through these sanctions to exert pressure on the people of Iran and separate them and create gaps between them and the establishment and the government, it was from the very onset clear that it would not succeed. But what he did accomplish is to create a distance and widen a distance that existed from before between the people of Iran and America, which today the greatest distance and gap exists between the people, the nation of Iran and the American government. And a great deal of so it was very clear that the path chosen by them from the onset would never succeed. So despite these pressures and these wrong choices, they keep saying that we wish to speak to Iran. We have no problem talking or negotiating, but we are not willing, with the existence of preconditions, to enter into talks. If America takes the maximum pressure, the sanctions, off the table, and in a way demonstrate its sincerity and give us the needed trust that with this government we are able to talk and reach a conclusion, of course that would be a different set of circumstances and a different atmosphere.
NBC News, next question, Moeko Notebe, TBS.
Dan Deleuze, NBC News. To diffuse tensions and to build confidence between the two governments, would the Supreme Leader support and endorse the idea of discussions about resolving the fate of Americans held in Iran and Iranian nationals detained in the United States?
You are very well aware that on different occasions in the past, we held talks with American officials aimed at freeing of prisoners held in both countries. At times we did succeed. meaning that the Americans or the dual citizens, whatever the case may be, those were freed, as you recall. In return, on the other side, the Iranians held here were freed as well. And Mr. Trump's administration, with Mr. Trump's administration, we started this type of discussion a couple of different times to speak about the prisoners. And once the Americans announced that if at least one of those held in Iran would be freed, we would take that as a gesture of goodwill, and we would reciprocate. And this happened on the Iranian side. A dual citizen that had Lebanese and American citizenship was freed, was released. And instead of the Americans to take reciprocal steps and free an Iranian or more, they only thanked Iran. They only made an expression. So we have always been ready to do this. We will always be ready, but the ball today stands in America's court.
Otebe, TBS, the next question, Valeria Roboco, answer.
Hi, this is Moyako from TBS. Thank you very much for having us at the press conference and answering questions. As a Japanese media, I have a question in regards to a bilateral meeting with Japan, Prime Minister Abe. I understand that you had very traditional and cordial meeting with Prime Minister Abe, and I would like to ask you if there's any way for Japan to play a role to contribute fixing the relationship between United States and Iran. What is your thought of it?
Our relations with the Japanese government have been and are and will be good and fruitful relations, friendly relations. And with Mr. Prime Minister Abe, I have held many meetings during the past few years, perhaps 8 or 9 different times we've held a bilateral meeting and spoken of bilateral issues, international issues, and recently, a few months ago, you may recall that he had a visit to Tehran, which was a very good visit, very fruitful, useful visit. And in New York, yes, we did have a friendly encounter during which we spoke of different topics. Yes, Prime Minister Abe has been seeking this particular path from a few months ago in particular, aimed at taking away the sanctions implemented by America, and in a way to bring both sides together and change the conditions and atmosphere. Mr. Abe is still seeking to move on that pathway, which perhaps to some degree emanates from their just preoccupation as well. We do hope that these pathways yield to tangible results only if America reaches the conclusion that the actions taken 18 months ago have been 100% to the detriment of herself, of the nation and people of Iran, and all of the countries in the region, and all of the job creators and industries and companies that were and still are some engaged in business with Iran. So the right choice must be made.
The next question, Valeria Roboco, answer. The next, Richard Ross, CNN.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is, did you have any contact with the new Italian government, and did you count still on the traditional friendship between our two countries? Thank you.
Yes, with the new Italian government, of course, not during the framework of this visit, of the current visit, but during last year's UNGA visit in New York, we did have a meeting. Our relationship is friendly, even with the government previous to the previous one, during the auspices of which I traveled to Italy, and reciprocally the Italian Prime Minister traveled to Iran. The relations are friendly, and of course, because of the recent American sanctions. In some issues, our economic relation has decreased, but the commercial relations and ties between the two countries, as well as other relations in other arenas, political, social, cultural, continue to exist. And Italy has always been one of the countries in Europe that had the greatest volume at times, and at times it had the second highest volume of trade with Iran. And of course, we see Italy as a friend, and of course, even today, vis-a-vis some regional issues such as Yemen, about which we talk with other European countries, the Italians are present in those talks and contacts as well, and definitely play a role.
The next will be David Weiner, Bloomberg.
Richard Roth, CNN. Welcome back, Mr. President. There's a report today from overseas that the IAEA says that there's a breach of the JCPOA, that Iran has been starting advanced models of centrifuges to enrich uranium. This is at Natanz, and you're accumulating or have been prepared to accumulate enriched uranium. And 5 years ago, you left for the airport. You got a call from President Obama. Do you expect to get a phone call on the way to the airport today or tomorrow?
The last part, my answer to that is negative. But vis-a-vis the first part of your question, we have announced that step. The third step in decrease of JCPOA commitments by us was that the limitations that we had vis-a-vis research and development within the framework of the JCPOA, we have left those limitations. We have taken those limitations off the table. We announced it formally. We announced it to the IAEA as well. But I want to share a very important point with you. The supervision and the inspections of the International Atomic Energy Agency have not been limited or decreased. The International Atomic Energy Agency, in the same fashion that since the beginning of the JCPOA in 2015, was supervising and inspecting and carrying forward its activities in Iran, today it is carrying forward those activities in the same manner. There have been no decreases whatsoever. Some of the commitments in the JCPOA have been decreased, and one of them was in the field of research and development, and now there is no talk of increasing the enrichment level. That's not the scope of what we're doing. Our scope is research and development, and the advanced centrifuges that were supposed a few years from now we were supposed to start the chain of those advanced centrifuges. That has been moved up. That schedule has been moved up. So we have gotten around to that sooner. And once this chain is completed, of course, it will be made active. And this is, again, the only purview of this is research and development with no other aims or objectives. You're quite right, but the important point is that we announced this ahead of time transparently.
Next question, Lillian Tan, CGTN.
During the recent G7 meeting, President Trump said that he'd be supportive of a credit guarantee, which President Macron was working on. It later surfaced the offer was for $15 billion. Is that still on the table? And why is that being held up, in your opinion? What were the financial options that were discussed this week? Is there a new instrument that is being discussed, or is it still for the $15 billion? Thank you.
Of course, during our recent conversations, we have been talking about taking away the sanctions in their entirety. What we spoke of and discussed in New York, you know, the credit line, discussion was a temporary one for a length of time of 3 months or 4 months at the most, after which it would continue in a different fashion or form. In our opinion, that is still on the table, but what the Europeans are facing as far as problems in implementing that and activating it, they know, we don't. But in New York, our discussion was above and beyond credit lines. It was about taking away the sanctions in their entirety. And some of the important regional issues were also discussed. And this discussion, of course, did not come to full fruition, and perhaps it will be carried forward on other occasions.
Mr. President, I'm Li Ling Tan from Feature Story News and China Global TV Network. China's State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called for all efforts to resolve the nuclear issue. Given the U.S. pressure and new sanctions on Chinese firms for transporting oil from Iran, and the lack of success by the Europeans in their efforts to try and soften the economic blow on Iran, how much of a role is China playing, and what more would you like to see from Beijing?
China has been and is our friend and was an active member of the JCPOA negotiations and ultimately signatory. And after the signing of the JCPOA, we had good relations, and perhaps we have seen a decrease in our relations, in the volume of our relations due to the sanctions. But the Americans are still seeking their previous policies, are still moving forward with those policies. In other words, more pressure aimed at reaching discussions, which is the same thing that is taking them farther and farther away from discussions and negotiations. So this is the mistake that they have made and keep making, unfortunately. And as you said, every day, perhaps on a daily basis, America targets and brings under sanctions an entity or more because of their relationship with Iran and the implementation of illegal and wrong policies of sanctions, which cannot be in their nature extraterritorial, is being pursued and implemented. So, but we wish for our relationships with China to be expanded in all fields.
New York Times. Next question, Nabil Abissar, Al Arabi TV.
Mr. President, David Sanger from the Times, good to see you. You talked before about the maximum pressure that the United States is placing on Iran. Would you say that the strategic purpose of your escalation of nuclear activity at Natanz is your own form of maximum pressure? And if not, what is its strategic purpose? You've said many times you don't want to build nuclear weapons. So what is the purpose of continuing to increase the production at Natanz? And do you see an end to that? Is there an end point beyond which you would not go, beyond 20%, for example?
What we have announced even previously, our commitments within the JCPOA are bilateral, multilateral. Some of those commitments we have to fulfill, other commitments our counterparts have to fulfill. What we have witnessed in the last few months had become a unilateral set of commitments that had to be implemented. In other words, we were living up to our commitments fully, and they kept decreasing their commitments. We wanted to create a balance. Just as they were decreasing their commitments, we wish to decrease ours as well. And this is a formula that had been envisaged in paragraphs 26 and 36 of the JCPOA, that if one side does not live up to and fulfill part of their commitments, the other side can, to the same degree, decrease its commitments. So what we do is a decrease of commitment within the JCPOA. Therefore, we announced that the decrease of our commitments is in such a fashion that is reversible. In other words, this very hour that we're talking to each other here, if the 4+1 announced that we will fulfill all of our commitments, immediately we will also return to all of our commitments within the JCPOA. And the temporary actions that we are taking will be reversed to their previous status. So we're not seeking nuclear weapons. Our nuclear activities are completely under the purview and inspections of the IAEA. We're not after maximum pressure or medium pressure or low pressure. We seek the proper execution and implementation of the JCPOA. So if we do not lessen our commitments as envisaged in Articles 26 and 36 of the JCPOA, then that means that we are not fully implementing the JCPOA. We are using the tools brought into the JCPOA to live up to our commitments, and therefore we hope that everyone returns to full implementation.
TV, next question, Lawrence Norman, Wall Street Journal.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. We heard from the Turkish President, Mr. Erdogan, yesterday a proposal that he suggested or called on Iran, Russia, and the U.S. to coordinate a solution for northern Syria that includes a safe zone in northern Syria. I would like to know your position on this proposal, and how do you see a best solution? What is the best solution for northern Syria, in your opinion, including Idlib? Thank you.
This topic, during the most recent gathering that we had in Ankara, Turkey, in which the three presidents of the three countries, Russian Federation, Mr. Putin, Mr. Erdogan, and myself, representing our countries respectively, we held these discussions, and one of the discussions was the topic of security in northern Syria. This is the right of the Turkish government to have security along its borders. This is correct, but on the other side, it is very important for us as well that the Syrian territorial integrity be maintained. We believe, and we have said it in the trilateral talks before, that the best solution is that the Americans would exit Syria, because part of the problems in northern Syria are being created by Americans themselves. For the Americans, therefore, to leave, Idlib, in which terrorists have congregated, must be cleansed of the terrorist presence, and the Syrian army, for the Syrian army to come and be placed along the Turkish borders. This is the best solution. Instead of the Turkish army to go along the border or even over the border and establish itself on Syrian territory, for the Turkish army to remain inside Turkish territory and the Syrian army be able to come to its northern borders and commit mutually to the security of the borderlines. This is the solution that we offered in the trilateral meetings, and we do hope that the best solution will be found.
Wall Street Journal, and the next and last question goes to Nizar Aboud Al-Mayadin.
Thanks a lot, Mr. President. Lawrence Norman from the Wall Street Journal. Can I ask you a question that takes you back to your speech yesterday? You talked about the JCPOA as a minimum agreement with the United States and others. And you said that if the US lifts sanctions, there could be some kind of more for more negotiation. Can I ask you to be a little more precise? Were you talking about more for more only on the nuclear file, Or could those talks in the future include other issues, regional issues, missile issues? And could you tell us what will happen with the Stena Impero, please? Will it be released?
What we believe in is that the JCPOA is not a maximum form of agreement. It is what was possible in its time, what was obtainable in its time, and was agreed upon by all involved parties, and it must be implemented. Now, if we wish to take a step above and beyond the JCPOA, that is possible. But the proper foundation would lie upon the full and exact implementation of the JCPOA first, which means that we must all be united in the equal implementation of it. But at the same time, we can talk and conduct talks about actions above and beyond. And we made it very specific in which fields or on what subject matters we're willing to talk. Vis-a-vis the missiles, it is to everyone's benefit for them to not ask us, because they would end up owing us much, much more than fathomable, because the Americans and the Europeans have been sending and are sending so many weapons and missiles and missile systems to the region that if they wish to even start talking about missile activity, the first thing that they should do logically is to stop the distribution and sales of those weapons to the region. And perhaps even in the same fashion, the same way that they're selling weapons to our neighbors, they should make those available for sale to us as well, because those limitations within the JCPOA, according to the UN agreement, is coming to an end in a short period of time. So again, I do think that they should not touch upon this topic, because, as I said, they would end up owing us much due to their activities and their positions. But about other issues, I think we can talk to one another. The limits or limitations of those talks, we have spoken about the details of those with the Europeans, and those talks have been transferred to the American side as well. As far as the Stena Impero vessel that you touched upon and you asked about, normally it is, the case file is going through its last stages in the court system, and I foresee that it will be freed.
Thank you, Dr. Rouhani. Nizar Aboud of Al Mayadeen Television. Iran has been accused by Saudi Arabia and many of the Western powers that it is destabilizing the Middle East in many aspects. Recently, Mr. Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, has conveyed a message to you from Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and from Donald Trump. Can you share with us some information about this approach and whether Saudi Arabia is forthcoming regarding not supporting the terrorists and the separatists who destabilize Iran inside? Would you also talk about this if possible? And is there any possibility of talks regarding Yemen with Saudi Arabia and a new end to this bloody war?
Yes, as you said in your question, during the meeting with the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, both issues were talked about, our relationships with Saudi Arabia and the topic of Yemen, as well as the problems that we have with the United States of America. The Pakistani Prime Minister was most recently in Saudi Arabia, conducted talks with Saudi Arabian officials, and a few points he shared with me about his talks with those Saudi officials, and even here he had a meeting with Mr. Trump, and some points of those, some discussions and points of that meeting were transferred to me as well. The entirety of the issue that you brought into your question is correct. Our belief is that the war in Yemen must be brought to an end. It does not benefit anyone. And in our region, we must pursue and seek peace. In my opinion, our problem with Saudi Arabia is principally and fundamentally goes back to the Yemeni issue. If there is a ceasefire in Yemen, in my opinion, our problems with Saudi Arabia in a more expedient fashion can be resolved. The war in Yemen does not benefit anyone. Vis-a-vis other issues, we will keep talking as requested by the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. We will keep being in contact.
Mr. President, for your time, and thank you all again for your contribution. Hope to see you soon, and goodbye.
I also want to thank all of you for having participated and have given me this chance to be here with all of you this year as well. And I do hope that our ultimate objective that I'm sure is shared by all of us is for us to work hard and strive towards reaching peace and stability in our region and make that a reality. Thank you.